So before I dive into my presentation, just a little bit about me. So as Sania said, my name's Emma Sexton. I'm a clinical research nurse for University Hospital Sussex, NHS Foundation Trust. I've been in my research role for just coming up for 2 years. And for a year and a half of that, I've also been a champion for the Associate Principal Investigator scheme, which I'll be referring to as the API scheme, just because it's a bit more concise. And it's a really exciting role to be a champion for the scheme. And as a champion, I promote the scheme and I kind of raise awareness of the scheme, which is why I'm here to talk to you today. So let's dive right in. So obviously I don't know who I'm pitching it to, so just a little bit of a brief overview of the scheme. So it's a 6-month in-work training opportunity that provides practical experience to healthcare professionals starting their research career. I'll discuss a bit more about which healthcare professionals are eligible for the scheme in another slide. But the scheme's just a chance for these healthcare professionals to experience delivering an NIHR portfolio study under the mentorship of a local principal investigator. And really importantly, it's a chance for them to get formal recognition of their engagement in research through being certified as an associate principal investigator. This is particularly appealing for those wanting evidence of continued professional development and or keen to get a foothold into research, potentially if they want to move on to becoming a principal investigator in the future. And that feeds on really well into the aims of the scheme. So obviously one of the main aims is to develop healthcare professionals into hopefully becoming principal investigators in the future. The scheme also aims to get clinical research really integrated into clinical roles and training, and promotes and recognises the importance and engagement of a wide variety of healthcare professionals in the NIHR portfolio research. So I just thought it necessary to put a few key facts of the scheme into this presentation because they're common points that get brought up to me. So firstly, with regards to healthcare professionals that enrol on the scheme, they can't have research as a core part of their role. So for example, as a clinical research nurse, I wouldn't be eligible for the scheme. And one of the reasons being is that the scheme's there to teach individuals more about research delivery and processes. So it's not really suitable for somebody that already works in research. There are other schemes that would be suitable for these people, but I won't delve into those today because in the interests of time, and we're talking about the API scheme. So these individuals, they have to be willing to make a significant contribution to a local study and commit 6 months of their time to completing study activities, which includes things like screening, recruitment, training, amongst others. And it's also important to mention, unfortunately, there's currently no funding for the scheme. This could change in the future, but because there's no funding, this is why applicants must undertake the scheme alongside their core role. There might be some ability to negotiate time with your managers, but this isn't funded by the NIHR. Though whilst the NIHR recommends 2 to 3 hours per week to work on the study and that you're enrolled for the scheme, this is just a guide. There's no mandated time, so you can spend as much or as little time as you feel necessary to complete the scheme's checklist and get what you want to get out of the scheme. Finally, applicants must register prospectively. There's no ability for retrospective enrolment. So if you've been working on that particular study for 3 months and then you choose to enrol onto the scheme for that study, you will still have to complete another 6 months working on that study. So it's important to think about that when you're thinking about when to enrol and timescales. So that's just some quick key facts. Now to discuss eligibility. So I'm going to go through which trainees are eligible and then also which studies are eligible for enrolment on the scheme. So I've already spoken about how healthcare professionals can't specifically be funded to work on research, and they must commit 6 months of their time to working on a particular study at their site. But it's important to mention that if a trainee has enrolled on the scheme for a particular study, but they're moving hospitals within the same trust, if the study has the same PI at the hospital they're moving to, there is a potential that they can transfer their tenure and continue on the study. But it's important to speak to NIHR because this isn't always possible. If they're moving to a hospital that's got a different PI for the study, then they'll have to cancel their tenure and re-enroll for another 6 months. Just because obviously you have to have the same person overseeing your tenure for the 6 months. Obviously, the chosen study has to be registered on the scheme. So in the next slide, I'll talk about study eligibility and I'll mention how to check if a study is registered on the scheme. The trainee must also have approval from their local PI for that study, just because that's the individual that will be supporting them. So it might be that that person just doesn't have capacity to support someone on the scheme at that time. So it's just worth having those conversations. And the last point to mention is that you can only be registered for one study on the scheme at a time. So you can complete the scheme more than once. So if you want to register for a particular study, complete 6 months for that study, get your certificate as an Associate Principal Investigator for that study, you can then reapply for another study and do another 6 months on a different study. You just can't be on the 2 studies on the scheme at the same time. Hopefully that makes sense. So moving on to the study and study eligibility. So to check if the study is registered on the scheme, you can visit the NIHR API scheme website, which I'll put a link to at the end of the presentation. And through that website, there's a dashboard that has a list of all the studies that are registered on the scheme. If you can't find the study you're interested in on that list, then you can always speak to the national study team for that particular study and see whether they're happy to get it registered. Studies which are eligible for registration on the scheme are obviously NIHR portfolio studies. You can find out if it's an NIHR portfolio study through the RDN portfolio database on the NIHR website. It can be non-commercial, but also the scheme is now accepting new commercial studies, which is very exciting. There must be at least 6 months left of recruitment for that particular study, just because obviously it has to enable applicants to be able to fulfill all aspects of their checklist to get signed off. The study must also have a clinical trials unit, a sponsor or equivalent organisation that's managing the study, and it must be under a speciality that's currently supported by the scheme. The scheme does support a wide range of specialities, and again, this can be found, this list, on the NIHR API scheme website, which I'll link to at the end. Most specialities are supported on the scheme. So having discussed eligibility, I just thought I'd summarise the process for trainees. So firstly, check you're eligible for the scheme, which we've briefly gone into. Find a suitable study that's registered on the scheme. Complete your application form, obviously once you've spoken to the local PI for that study and check they're happy to support you. The application forms, again, can be found on the API website, which I'll link to at the end. You should also then access online learning. So the API scheme does have a learning pathway on NIHR Learn. Obviously, if you don't have an NIHR Learn account, you'll have to create one and go through those learning pathways. Then also complete your checklist over the 6 months, which then gets signed off by your local PI and the National Study Coordinator for your study. Once you've had it signed off by both those individuals, you can then submit your checklist. And you then, once you've submitted your checklist, you then get your certificate confirming that you're an Associate Principal Investigator for that study. So I just wanted to put a couple of slides in just to show how well endorsed the scheme is. It's been running for quite a few years, and many colleges and other professional bodies really endorse the scheme. I believe a small section of these might give credit for the scheme, but I'm sure NIHR can confirm or deny that. But as you can see, it's endorsed by several different professional bodies. These are just a few, and some more. So I know I rattled through that, but I just wanted to end with some feedback from people that have actually completed the scheme. I get a lot of feedback and it's always positive, so I just thought it was important to just put a section of feedback in for you. So somebody said that it was an amazing opportunity to develop their understanding in clinical research. Another said it was a stepping stone, obviously, for working as a principal investigator. It was important to note that the online platforms and resources are really easy to navigate, and also the programme itself isn't time consuming, which means that you can successfully complete it around other clinical commitments, because I know that's a particular worry for people that are busy clinically. So it's not time consuming, you can fit it into your regular role. And my favourite bit of feedback, which this is just from one person, but there's a few people that have said this, that it was actually the most rewarding thing they'd done as a clinician. I think people really like getting involved in research, especially if they've never done it before. So it's really lovely to hear how well received the scheme is. So just to end, I've spoken a couple of times about the link to the NIHR Associate Principal Investigator Scheme website. So I just thought I'd put it in at the end. You can either type that into Google or scan the QR code, which I'm 100% confident it works. And that will give you, obviously, the dashboard that's got the list of studies that are registered and specialities. It will give you more information about the scheme and some resources, and also the application forms can be found through that link. So like I said, I've rattled through that. I could talk for ages about it. So I've put my contact details if anybody does want to contact me to discuss further. But for the moment, thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.